So after the book of Leviticus, we go to the book of Numbers. Numbers is the fourth book of the Bible. And it is very interesting to know that God keeps records. When the Lord tells us that we shall give an account of our life, it's because he keeps records. And also, census has not started with the nations of the world. Census started with God. And therefore, as you read the book of Numbers, you realize that God is a God of order. And so the word numbers is gotten from a Greek word, which means, just as the name implies, numbers. And it is given that title because as you read the book of Numbers, there are two censuses that took place, or two numbering of the Israelites that took place, which is in chapter 1 and also chapter 26. The book in Hebrew is not known as Numbers. It is known as Wilderness Wanderings, derived from a Hebrew word, which is Bamidbar. Well, you don't have to keep the name, but it's good to know, because also the theme of the book is wilderness wanderings. The Israelites have come out from Egypt, but they wandered in the wilderness for 38 years. The author of the book is Moses. And the book, as it starts, you see it starts with events at Mount Sinai, which already in the book of Exodus we said that the Israelites had to camp in Mount Sinai, and we saw the reasons why. The book also recounts the wanderings where the old generation, the whole old generation had to die except Joshua and Caleb. The book also talks about a new generation that we see at the end of the book reaching the Jordan River. And therefore, as you go through the book, it starts with Israel camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. It also lets us to see God giving them the laws, which were to prepare them so that they may be able to move to the promised land. We also see God having time to consecrate them or to set them aside for himself by preparing them or making them ready spiritually and physically to receive their inheritance. As you read also through the book, you realize that it ends with the failure of the Israelites. They focused. Why did they fail? They focused on their present discomforts that they were going through. And because of that, we find them grumbling, complaining, and murmuring. And some of the things that they were murmuring about was about food. And also, this led them to rebellion against the authority of Moses. We also see the failure in trusting God, failure that led them to disobedience, and also led them to walk in unbelief. And the climax of it is when they followed the report of the 10 spies about the giants in the land. Also, as you read the book of Numbers, it ends with the Israelites not entering into the promised land, but facing the greatest test, whereby they had to make a decision, and they settled at the plains of Moab because they had to make a decision to get over the river Jordan and possess their inheritance. They also, because of this failure, failed, as you read the book of Deuteronomy, daily to walk with God as he had intended, Number 2, they also failed to fulfill the purpose that God had for them, concerning them being a portrait of God in the midst of the other nations. They also failed to get committed and walk in obedience. The key verses in the book of Numbers is Numbers 14, verses 22 and 23. And I pray that you'll make it your memory verse. The outline of the book of Numbers, number 1, is the preparation for departure from Mount Sinai. Preparation. God was preparing them, and that is why he was taking census for departure from Mount Sinai. You read this in Numbers chapter 1, verses from Numbers chapter 1 to Numbers chapter 10, verses 10. This is where you get the events of census, and the roles of the Levites is defined, and also they are reminded of the purity of the camp, and also they are given the guidance of their journey. Number 2 of the outline is the journey from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab, which is in chapter 10, from verses 11 to chapter 21, verses 35. And in these chapters, this is where you read the events of the Israelites complaining, Miriam and Aaron opposing the authority of Moses, the 10 spies inciting the Israelites into rebellion, and also it led to more regulations added in their list. And later on you see the readers rebel against the authority of Moses, and eventually the duties of the priests and the Levites given afresh. Number 3, it is also where number 3 of the outline, it's the prophecies of Balaam. It's a common story, chapter 22, from verses 1 to chapter 25, verses 18. Number 4 is the instructions and God's preparation for now the new generation to enter into Canaan, or to enter into the promised land. This is where you read the events of the second census, the instructions on offerings, the vengeance on Midianites, and the first settlement, which was before the crossing over of Jordan. And at the end of the book, it is the Israelites camped at plains of Moab. There are many insights in the book, but the insights that I have chosen to write, it's number 1, being reminded that the Israelites were redeemed from Egypt. They had already possessed the law as given by God, so they knew God's commandments. Moses was their leader, chosen by God. Moses was their leader, chosen by God. As we know, leaders are chosen by God. Daily, the Israelites had the sight of the tabernacle as it was pitched in their midst. So every time they would wake up, the first thing that they would see from their tent doors was the tabernacle, which represented the presence of God. And lastly, the last insight is that supernaturally they were guided by a cloud by day and by pillar of fire by night, so that God will remind them of their presence. So as we read the book of Numbers, may we remember that God is with us. He is present in our life. God bless you.